Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. Today, I've got someone who is exceedingly near and dear to my heart, and she is someone that I feel like I owe my life to on some level, and I certainly feel like I owe her just a debt I'll never be able to repay in terms of what I do now with my life and how fulfilling it is and the lifestyle that I get to live. And I'm going to start with a quick story about how I met her before I even tell you who she is, even though you already know who she is because you saw the title of the podcast. So it's 2009 and I'm at TED, having applied to get into what's called TED Active, which we jokingly called the kids table at TED, but it was kind of for the younger up and coming people. It was more affordable. And so TED was happening in Long Beach and we were sitting in Palm Springs at this fabulous, one of the coolest hotels I've ever been to. It was made in the 60s and it was just so cool. And we were in this big room and Aida has just played, which is how TED starts. And of course, I'm one of the ultra super geeks because I've just I didn't think that I would get, you have to apply to go. And I thought I got in on like a technical mistake or something. And then I couldn't afford it, even though it was cheaper than TED, but I just put it on a credit card and I was there because I had to be at this conference because it was just so freaking cool. So I'm in the head of the line. I get into the room as Aida is playing and TED is about to begin. And I sit down in the front row and I'm sitting there so excited to be at TED, and on comes Ben Zander, and he's my hero. Like, he's the guy. I saw his talk from 2008 called Classical Music and Passion, and it was just the best talk I think I'd ever seen in my life. And I was like, I have to be at this conference if that's what it's like. So he was my inspiration. And he gets up and he walks out and he says, "Oh, everybody, it's Ted's 25th anniversary. So we're going to sing happy birthday to Ted. But first, we're going to find somebody who has an actual birthday going on so we can focus on a real person. Okay, you, madam, come down. And he says, now, while she's coming down, I want to point something out to you. I want to point out to you when you sing happy birthday, you've got some choices to make. You could sing happy birthday to you. You could sing happy birthday to you. You could sing happy birthday to you, or you could sing happy birthday to you. Now, which one do you think the person you're singing to is going to like the best, right? And then boop, oh, the screen goes blue, blue screen of death. Oh, the beep noise, the sound goes down. And all of a sudden it goes from feeling like we're at TED to feeling like we're a bunch of kind of dorks sitting alone in the desert, in this empty theater with nothing on the screen. And I was like, no, Ben, that's my guy, right? And I go, I think I know where he was going with this. I'm just going to get up and cover for him till they get the signal back. And then my monkey mind goes, oh, John, you're always that guy. Like, let somebody else have a chance for once. I mean, geez, you don't want to, they're going to throw you out if you do that. And I'm like, okay, I'll count to 10. So I count to 10. Nobody's jumped up yet. So I jump up and I turn around and I look, and now 500 people looks like 5,000. And I'm like, I think I know where he was going with that. Let's sing happy birthday to Ted. And somebody says, get someone to come down. I'm like, oh yeah, who's having a birthday? And turns out that this guy who did Ask a Ninja, big guy with a beard and, burly guy from New Jersey, comes down. And so he walks down and I lead everybody in singing happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ask a Ninja guy. And I look over, and as we finish up with that last happy birthday to you, he is so moved by this that he is crying, tears running down. They're going through his beard and dripping onto his shirt. And I give him a really big hug when we finish singing. And then he goes to sit down and I look at everybody. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And on comes Ben Zander. No kidding. They get the signal back. And Ben Zander's now on the screen again, and he says, "Oh, that was lovely. That was lovely. The TED Choir. You're so wonderful. Okay, so happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Ted." And then he goes, and I sit down. And now through the whole first opening session of TED, I'm sitting there in mortal fear that they're just going to come drag me out and kick me out because like I probably wasn't supposed to do that. And then when that session ends, I look over at the host, Kelly Stoetzel, and the co-host, Reeves, and I look at them and they look at me and they jump up and they just make a beeline for me. And I know they're going to throw me out. And they come over and they come running up to me and they're like, John, that was so great. We're so glad you did that. And I looked at them and I said, well, I counted to 10. And they said, well, that's funny because we counted to 13, but we're really glad you did it because that's the spirit of TED Active. We want you to participate and, let us introduce you. And so they then took me around and just introduced me to everybody that was anybody at TED. And that whole experience just changed my life. And I went back to TED Active a number of times and it was fabulous. And the people that I met there changed my lives and the experience of being at TED changed my life. And Kelly, if you would not have had the idea for TED Active, I wouldn't have been there because it wouldn't have happened. So this is Kelly Young Stoetzel. And she is formerly the head of conferences at TED, and now she is the managing director of the Edelman Fossil Park and Museum, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which I cannot wait to go to. And Kelly, thanks for sitting through that whole long story, but that is the first time that I met you, and knowingly and unknowingly, you completely changed my life. So thank you for joining me.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. And what an incredible just thing to hear. And I mean, honestly, I could hear that story 100 times because I was there. I was in the room. It's one of my favorite TED moments of all also. And, I was sitting there going, oh no, what's happening? This is terrible. We're going to have to get up and do something. And then Reeves goes, hold on, just count to 13. I'm not even kidding. And I mean, it was magical what happened. It's one of those things too that is an incredible reminder of, sometimes errors or things that go wrong are just the best opportunities. They're opportunities, not problems. And that's exactly what that was. And that also made, I think, everyone's experience there so much richer, than if it had just played straight through as it was meant to.
It was funny because since I was the dorky guy that got up and did that, everybody that was there in that opening session, I think felt more comfortable with me and felt kind of like they knew me. So it was like all of a sudden I was everybody's friend, and it was, and I didn't, it was just made it a magical experience for me. And, it was one of the things about TED Active, and I think we're going to get a little deep geek here about TED and TED Active and stuff. So, warning to anybody who's not into it, that's what we're doing. And we're also going to talk about the Edelman Fossil Park and Museum. But, that was the ethos, and I didn't know it at the time, but that was the ethos of TED Active. And so will you tell us a little bit more about what TED Active was and where it came from and why that ethos was such a strong part of it?
Yeah, for sure. We decided to first do TED Active because, when I started working at TED, it was a once a year conference and that was it. There was no online video or anything. And then kind of all roughly around the same block of time, online video became a thing. And so we started posting talks and then a lot more people became aware of TED and of the conference. Just, I think a year after that, TEDx started. And so a lot more people became aware of the conference because of that and our volunteer translator program. And so it started to really have a global presence. So the conference started like just quickly selling out. And so we decided to see what would happen if we held a simulcast conference, like a conference in a different location that was simulcast. So the first year we did that, we did it in Aspen. And we were the first people, I think, to use the Dora Hosier building at the Aspen Institute. And it was a beautiful space, it's just incredible there. And so we had a tiny little team we took with us to put on this experiment. And just the day before the conference was about to start, attendees started showing up, and they were coming in and registering, and we were out there meeting them, and we had just set the room up, and it looked beautiful, and we had couches and pillows, and it was set like kind of like a living room with all the soft, cozy stuff that you could imagine, like really, getting into these little living room nooks and stuff. And then a projector, so that someone installed a projector or a lighting fixture too close to a sprinkler head. And when that happens, it melts the wax on the sprinkler head, and the whole entire fire sprinkler system goes off and never stops. There's no way to shut it off until it's finished. And that's about 10 minutes of raining, hard, flooding rain on all of our soft, cushy, cozy furniture as attendees are showing up and the fire alarm's going off. And it is just like it was frankly terrifying. So what did I do? I had Reeves grab his camera and film it because that was the only thing I could think of to do. But yeah, that whole experience, though, it took a minute because that is stressful and it is like a live event kind of disaster. And I was like, okay, I got to figure this out. I'm going to guys, I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'm just going to go I stayed for a couple minutes, but I was like, I got to go. I'm just going to go for a little walk. And I did. And I was at the beginning of it sort of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then I got into this mode of like, all right, this is what we have to do, and this is what we have to operate with. And some of what we had to operate with, we didn't have a lot of staff. And so, but we had a lot of attendees who really cared, who showed up and who had paid money to be there, who were excited to be a part of this experiment too. So went back in, took care of a few logistical things, and then went out to registration where everyone was like, what's going on? What's going on? And I was like, well, here's what happened. Can you go to the gym and grab every towel you can find? Can you go grab some hair dryers? Can you? And everybody was like, well, what can I do? And I would be like, assign them jobs or can you just help mop or whatever? And it turned out to be the most incredible thing that ever happened because I really learned from that whole thing, all of those people. And there were so many that helped us get through this. There were so many people that helped us clean up this mess and make it so that we could actually open the next day, kind of against all odds.
Yeah.
And all of those people were like so invested in this thing. And then they just wanted to participate more and more. They wanted to organize, fun activities, and they wanted to lead conversations and get groups to meet up and all kinds of stuff. So they would come up and say, hey, can I have the mic and announce that I'm going to host a snowball fight out front on the next break? And that was like just the perfect thing we needed. And so we had gone there kind of not knowing exactly what the live hosted part was going to feel like and all this. And it turned out it was just about attendees deciding that the direction the whole thing would take. So it really then became like it was like you say, the ethos of TED Active was it's for all of us and we're all active participants in what it becomes.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I had no idea that happened until you and I talked even a few months ago, I think. So that's really, really, really cool. And again, 2 examples of how something that would technically be thought of as a bad thing turned into a really good thing. So that's cool. So, I think that it was an act of great courage for Chris Anderson of TED to make all this stuff available online, because I remember the TED conference back when it was a secret knock kind of, you got to be invited and, everything's a secret and all that. And I was going to volunteer. I got asked to volunteer that year and I was going to do it. But then I got invited to speak in Switzerland at this big event for my company at the time, Big Words. This was 2000. And so I said, hey, can my brother come instead of me? Because I've got to go do this. So my brother got to go to TED in 2000 and volunteer. And it was really, really cool. So I'd known about TED, but I had never thought that I could go until my friend Jim from Gold Star um, was there in Aspen, and he told me, John, come look at this talk. And he showed me Ben Zander's talk, which you can now find on TED.com. But he showed it to me on the DVD, because that's how people got those. But at a certain point, and it was such good timing because the internet was just starting to be capable of really doing video streaming. TED, Chris had just taken over TED recently, and he decided these things, information wants to be free. And he made all these things available. And a lot of people, if I understand it correctly, were telling him, hey, you're going to ruin TED. Like, this is the worst idea ever. You shouldn't do that. So I think it was a really an act of courage and generosity. Is that your feeling too, or is there more nuance to that?
Well, for sure. I mean, he is such a, he's a healthy risk taker, and he is so generous. And I think, I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen. You're exactly right. Like, we didn't know whether attendees would be upset about this or what would happen. But when he bought TED, he made it, his nonprofit bought it, and really that was about spreading ideas. And the biggest, when he did buy it, internet video wasn't possible. And then it became, a thing. And he just thought, well, this is a way to spread ideas far and wide, and we have to try it. And, I remember at the time there was a Malcolm Gladwell talk that had like 45,000 views. And, a typical TED conference, I don't know, today has about 1,800 people. I think back then it was about 1,000. And we thought, can you imagine if 45,000 people watched a TED Talk? Like, that would be incredible. That would be, that's like 45 TED conferences that people, of people that would get to know these good ideas and maybe, challenge their thinking and maybe, learn something really important. And so it was just amazing to see the way that they took off in such a positive and became such a positive experience for so many people.
Oh my gosh. I mean, globally, and then I think the same thing with TEDx, and people were saying it's going to ruin the brand and it's going to dilute the brand. And listen, in a way it kind of did, but I think that the benefit that it bought for ideas we're spreading to get spread was worth whatever it cost,
Oh yeah. I mean, I think TEDx is like the most incredible thing because, it kind of started because so many people would come to us and say, oh, I really enjoy watching the talks. I love what you guys are doing. Please bring TED to my country or my city. And we were a small team and we wished that we could do that, but we couldn't do it. And so really thought about what's a way that we could. And what we found, there are passionate people around the world that are so excited to bring up important work and just like great ideas and work coming up in their communities, and also who are just sort of like connected by curiosity. And so to see this happen around the world has been the most incredible thing. And yeah, occasionally there could be a range of quality in TEDx events, but what is also amazing is that the people who are TEDx organizers are so passionate about it that they maintain the community and they maintain the quality and they support one another. And, TED certainly has a good connection to the TEDx organizers. They get a free license if they're willing to follow a set of guidelines and then some support, with the development of their TEDx from TED, that sort of thing. But they also the main thing that's so amazing is the way that they support each other. And then because of that, we all get to learn about incredible things that, we wouldn't have necessarily known about before. Like the talks that have come up through TEDx and the people and ideas that have helped really shape a lot of the good things happening in the world today, they came because of that,
Well, and I think about two of my favorite TED personalities, if you will. One is Simon Sinek, and one is Brene Brown, both of whom were discovered originally through TEDx, right?
That's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. Both of them, both of their first TED Talks were TEDx talks. And, and it goes to show you, I think even at like Simon's in particular, if you look at it, it's, the video quality is not that great compared to some of the other talks that you see there, but the content is. And so it just kind of goes to show you too, like that talk went, became so popular, and it's just because it's so good, and there's
It's so good.
important, and really important takeaway in it,
Yeah. Yeah. There are probably people listening that want to give a TED or a TEDx talk, and like, you're not involved with TED anymore, and so they shouldn't come to you for that. Is there anything
I cannot help
that you wished? Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you wished people knew about that? Like in general, like if that's they've, really want to give a TED or a TEDx talk, is there, what are like a couple of things I tell them are, number one, everybody is flooding TED and TEDx wanting to give a talk. So understand they're flooded. Number two, it's not about selling your book. Like if that's the reason you want to give a TED or a TEDx talk, that's the wrong reason. You really got to approach this with the intention of giving people a great idea worth spreading. And if you do that, they'll want to buy your book, but you can't go in trying to sell your book. And then I also remind them that TEDx events are all volunteer events. And just because you're a really famous speaker out there in the world, maybe, does not mean very much to them, and prima donna speakers, like that TEDx community is very tightly knit. And if you're a prima donna speaker, everybody in the TEDx community is going to know really quickly, and they're not going to want to work with you. So I think you've got to take into account that these people are volunteers. You've got to take into account that it's about ideas worth spreading and just generously sharing of yourself. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I just want to even like build on one of the things you said, which is, that it's not about selling your book or whatever it is. It is like the whole thing that TED is about and that TEDx is about is getting up there and like sharing. And it's sort of instead of going, okay, I need the audience to know this, it's instead like, who's in the room, and what do I have that they would love to know, and then how do I best package that so that they can take it in. It's like all about them, right? And so I think that that's really important. I think one other thing I'll say just too about there are a lot of people that think I have to go, I've been working really hard. I have a great career. I have to go to TED to give my talk. And when I left there a couple of years ago, we were probably getting like 25,000 speaker nominations a year. And that, like, a given a 5-day live TED program has, about 80, 90 speakers, something like that. So that's just so many people. I mean, there's great stuff in there that just can't, maybe we can only have 2 talks that are like really specifically about some species of, whatever. Or, I mean, just the program itself is like really curated. So you can't have too much of one thing in the program anyway. So a lot of great people can't make it on the main TED stage or other TED stages because there are so few opportunities, really. And it's good to go through the speaker nomination form and apply that way. But also, I mean, so TED finds so many speakers because they give a great TEDx talk. And just because you've given a TEDx talk does not mean you can't also give a TED talk. And it's a great way for TED to find speakers. And then also sometimes TEDx talks do go straight to TED.com, and that's also, you've kind of achieved what you were hoping to achieve if that happens too.
Yeah. And I tell people, it's great. Go give a TED or a TEDx talk, like go through the process, get nominated, all that. And don't wait for TED. Like, you've got an idea that's worth spreading. Like, create that TED worthy talk and go give it anywhere, give it everywhere, get that idea out
Yes.
there, you know? And
Yes, I think that's true. And I think another with that, I guess one other kind of piece of speaking, you know, wisdom I would share, because I love seeing it when people do this, is, that I kind of always tell people to be like the most themselves they can possibly be when they give their talks. Like, the best TED Talks are so authentic, and you can really see that in
yes,
people. So I sometimes say, like, be yourself with the volume turned up about 10%, so you're
yeah,
yourself with a little oomph, a little
yeah, yeah.
extra
Yourself to
pizzazz.
11.
Yeah, exactly. Yourself to 11. I like it.
Yeah, that's so great. So I mean, I tell people that some of the most important coaching that TED ever gives speakers is, what is your one idea we're spreading?
Mm.
And I
Yes,
think
yes,
that
yes.
focus is really important. And then I love hearing it from your mouth, because one of the things that I think about TED is that it dramatically influenced, like, everything. And one of the things that TED did is up the bar on the amount of authenticity and vulnerability that we expect from people. We want to see authentic talks. We want to hear those vulnerable stories. And, I put a TM on this for whatever it matters, but it took me a decade, Kelly, to come up with this term. But I think what it is insightful vulnerability. That
Mm,
insightful vulnerability. It's not just vulnerability for vulnerability's sake. It's insightful
yeah.
vulnerability. What was that mistake or that problem or that thing, and how did you get through it? What was the lesson that you learned? You know. And I think TED
Yeah.
raised the bar for that all over the place, and it's a really good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that I like how you put that too, because it isn't just, you're when you do that, and when you're authentic, and you say something that feels like you're taking a risk, and you make yourself vulnerable. The thing is, you end up connecting with so many people. We have all struggled. We have all, had different sorts of and different degrees of challenges, but we can relate to a challenge. And
Yes.
while we may not understand exactly what it feels like to be in the challenge that speaker is talking about, there is most likely there is something in the story that we can really connect to, and really that it helps so much. It helps to build the connection with the speaker and the audience, and it helps an idea really land. A story does.
One of my heroes says two great things that I think are very, TED like. His name's Les Brown. He's one of the most requested, popular, highly paid public speakers in the world. But I learned a couple things from him that really influenced me a lot. One was what you just said in a different way. People don't connect with your successes, they connect with your messes. Your message is in your mess. And I think TED proves that out in a lot of ways. And then the other thing that can kind of clump right in there with it is, I love this. He says, never tell a story without a point, and never make a point without a story.
I love that. I love that. It's so true. And I mean, I think particularly, well, I mean, both of those are actually equally important, but the idea of never make a point without a story, that I think is a lot of speakers sort of struggle with that,
Yeah.
because, and it's probably some personality types. Like, it's easy for some people to, like, work, when they're crafting the way they communicate, to stay in the conceptual and steer away
Yeah.
from a story. But that is the thing that helps it land. And a story is also, I mean, it's the part of a talk that really sort of stays memorable as well. You
Yeah.
remember sometimes, it helps you also just helps the idea land.
Yeah. I was thinking about it, Kelly. This is, I mean, I do my best to base all my training in human evolutionary biology and neurophysiology. But when you go to school, they teach you don't fall for anecdotal evidence, which means don't think a story proves something. Don't think one story proves something, right? And they tell you that over and over, but they never ever teach you don't run face first into the wall, right? But that could kill you much more quickly than falling for anecdotal evidence. But the reason they don't have to tell you that is because you learned that when you were little, right? You did it once, ran face first into a wall. Ouch, that hurts. You won't do it again. But we are naturally drawn because we've been anatomically human for probably about 450,000 years. And Google, I mean, the printing press was invented basically yesterday in that time frame, right? So everything that came to us that was important, came to us in the form of a story, because complex things like how to do agriculture or how to build civilization or how to brew beer, you can't just give people big long lists of here's how you do it. It has to come in the form of a story so we'll remember it. And that means that our brains have come to more highly value story than anything else in communication, which is why they have to teach us in college, don't fall for anecdotal evidence, right? But the flip side of that coin is if you're not using anecdotal evidence when you want to make a really important point or when you've got some good data for something, then you're missing out on the number one tool for communicating with human beings, period. And I think TED has really, really proven that out.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, it's just all about how you're using it too, right? Because if you're, I mean, you can use anecdotal evidence in combination with actual evidence, with like scientific facts and data, and use, I mean, data tell a certain story, but then it's still the storytelling on top of that, is what exactly what you're saying. That's what connects us with the rest of the information.
Yeah, totally. So never tell a story without a point.
Never tell a story without a point. And never make a point without a story. I love it.
Yay. So what's one of the other kind of inside things that maybe people would love to know but don't know about TED or TED Active or the process of speaking at TED or anything like that?
I mean, I think, sometimes people assume that it's sort of like that there is a formula or a way that it works, for everyone. And that I would say I love to myth bust that, because that's not at all true. I mean, I think, TED is there to support speakers on the journey as they develop their talk, because it's a hard thing to do. And the stakes feel really high to speakers. And, and it's hard. It feels a little, public speaking scary. It is for many people. And, and so, TED is there.
Look what happened to Jesus and Joan of Arc and Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and Socrates, right? Like, it's dangerous to get noticed by the group.
Yeah.
Sorry,
that's
I didn't mean
dark. But it is. It's a lot. You're standing up there on a stage by yourself too. And, I think, but the way that it works for you is probably different than the way that it works for me. And you sort of start, I think that the way that TED works with speakers, they also know that and understand that, and really, are looking to, help people turn themselves up to 11 and all of that. But really to kind of, I mean, I think, the only, there are like there is the single idea within a talk, not 5 ideas or 2 ideas. They're all about one idea. And that's about as, formulaic as it gets. And in fact, there are some things as people develop talks that sort of tend to be, I think sometimes people will watch TED Talks and then go, oh, I think I need to put a photograph of my child or grandchild at the end. And it turns
Yeah,
out,
right. Yeah.
that's okay. And it does work in some cases. But, if you have a 5-day program, you really can't have very many people do that. And it's like, it
Yeah.
becomes, so sometimes they're actually trying to break the thing that people
Yeah.
think that they should do that is sort of a formula. But really, like, I think it's some of the best talks are people just going like, I have an idea, and it's maybe not what other people do. I remember Roman Mars, who is he hosts a podcast called 99% Invisible. That's about design. That's incredible. He is
Uh-huh.
great, and we had invited him to give a talk, and he kind of like, I hadn't talked to him for a little bit, and I was, we were getting ready to have, we had a prep call, and he was like, all right, here's the thing. I have two talks in mind. One of them is sort of this, I can't even remember what the other one was about, but it was kind of a grand conceptual, like big talk about design, right? And he was like, but then I kind of want to give this talk about the design of city flags. Like just something like, I think it's really interesting. It's really specific, but it just doesn't seem like a TED talk to me. And I was like, that is absolutely a TED talk, and he was like, really? Well, okay, what if he was like, okay, if I did that. And so then I was kind of trying to encourage him to, like, really, and I think he was already there himself, but he just didn't know that Ted was so welcoming of it, but he
Yeah.
he was, all right, well, if I can do that, could I make the stage be like a podcast studio? And could I set it up with the way that I feel comfortable, the way that I work? And I was like, that's the coolest. And so I think that, sort of some of that behind the scenes stuff, like that wasn't
Yeah.
that wasn't crafted by Ted. That was totally Roman's idea. And
Yeah.
it was such a great idea. And that was him
Yeah.
being the most himself that he could possibly be. And that talk is so good. I totally recommend everybody listen to it. It's actually changed a lot of city flags. It'll make you think about a lot about design. It's one of those really specific types of talks that you can think about how it applies to other areas of your life too.
I will put a link to that talk in the show notes for sure. And I love
Cool.
that. I mean, so if we're really looking for overarching rules here, because people like those, one is,
Mm-hmm.
what's your one idea we're spreading? So that is like, if there's a formula, that's part of the formula. The second one, I think, that we could take away from our conversation, which really helps, is be the most yourself that you can be. You could take that as
Mm-hmm.
part of the formula if you want a formula. And then one other thing that I didn't realize, Kelly, when I first came to TED, and I realize looking back on it now how silly this is, but my assumption was that they were basically getting up there and kind of winging it, you know? I don't think that could be further than the truth for most of these speakers. Like, if I understand it
Yeah.
correctly, you worked with them for like a year, some people maybe more, at least like 6 months. People really spend time preparing and practicing for their TED Talks, right?
Generally, they work really hard. I don't know. Some people know, like, I guess people who are, if they're occasionally people who know that they're going to be really good if they come at it with like a structure in their head, they'll write that, they'll plan it, and they'll sort of prepare it in practice, but they don't, spend their focus memorizing all of the words. That's
Oh,
not for
yeah.
everybody,
No,
right?
no,
So
no.
it's like
No, no, no. Yeah.
everybody kind of does it in a different way and with a kind of a different amount of prep. And then I will say too, one of my favorite things about working at TED, but this is probably hard on some of the speakers, is that really until the last minute. I mean, TED has a program planned and it's full and all of that, but then something happens in the world, 4 days before the conference
Right.
starts,
Yeah.
and it's sort of suddenly like, okay, we're on site getting ready, but we got to drop everything and find a speaker to address this. And there are speakers
Yeah.
who've been like, okay, fine, because this is a really good opportunity to get people to think about, this whatever topic that is important as, in the world currently, in a different way.
Right.
So there are some people who don't actually get the benefit of that time, but they
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
generally do put in, a lot of work to make sure they're communicating clearly and, and just sort of, and really practice. And they also, another just amazing thing that is just so fun to watch is, when they arrive on site, and they get to know each other, which sometimes happens ahead of getting there too. They
Uh-huh.
support each other so much. There are practice rooms there on site, and they'll get a group together and they'll all rehearse in front of each other and they cheer each other on. And
Oh,
that is so fun to see too.
that's really cool. That's super,
Yeah.
super cool. Well, I mean, and that kind of takes us back to just the whole thing about TED. I think one of the greatest things about TED, in fact, I was wearing a TEDx shirt around years ago, and I was in the grocery store, and the guy behind the counter like looked at me and said, "Oh, TEDx," and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. Do you know TEDx?" He goes, "Oh, I love TEDx." And I said to him, "That's great. I'm happy to meet you because I love knowing other people who care that much too." And I feel like that was really
Oh,
at the root of TED and TED Active and TEDx, is just people who care that much too. And they're not, they're willing to let other people know that they care that much, about things, about what's
mhm.
going on, about the world, about each other, just people who care. So, that I think is one of the core pieces of the TED community. And I think that's really cool.
I do too. And I like to think of it as, I think that is so true. And I think it's the way I kind of describe the community is that, because it really is it's people from all over the world and all different backgrounds and stuff. And I
Yeah.
think I always say it's a group of people who is united by curiosity.
Oh, good. That's very good. Yeah. Well, speaking of curiosity, you are now the managing director of the Edelman Fossil Park and Museum. And
Yes.
that I think is going to be like a really, really great curiosity satisfying place. Will you tell us a little bit about it and what you've got planned, and, tell us the story?
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. So this museum opens in the spring of 2024, just outside of Philadelphia, and it goes back to another TED Talk. So there is a TED Talk everyone should check out by Dr. Ken Lacavera, who is a paleontologist, and we met when he gave us his talk at TED and stayed friends for a long time. So I did know he was working on this project. So he's been building this museum on a scientifically significant fossil site in South New Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia, and the I joined the project about a year ago and kind of came on full time back in May, and it's such an incredible museum. The building itself is beautiful. It was designed by ENIAD's Thomas Wong, and it's going to be New Jersey's largest carbon net zero building. And it's on 65 acres, and the museum itself, just it brings you in with like the wonder of fossils and dinosaurs in deep time. But it also then talks about humans and the tiny place that we occupy in space and time and the outsized impact that we're making on the planet. And you learn about prior mass extinctions, and also that there are amazing people pushing back against the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and that you can too. So it's incredibly it's a really inspiring experience, and it really mirrors, like, if you ever made a TED Talk into a museum and you watch Ken's TED Talk, this is like a super rich, like nothing ever before experience of that talk. And you also get to there's an amazing like free roaming VR experience with haptics and the whole thing. And then there's a you can dig for fossils in the fossil quarry, which is so, and basically everyone who participates there will find a 66 million year old fossil that has never been touched before by a human. And And it's amazing. I myself found the coolest shark tooth the other day. I'm learning about
Oh, wow.
all of this now. This is all kind of new to me, so I've been reading lots of books, but it is so amazing to do that. I cannot even tell you.
Oh, that's awesome. So it will give us a shout out for one of the books that you've read. We're going to watch Dr. Ken's talk. And then if we want to read a
Yeah.
book before spring of 2024, what's one of the ones that really stands out for you that you've
Shoot.
been
I
reading?
read on my Okay, hold on. I'm getting up for a second because I have one over
Okay.
here that I've been reading, but I can't remember the title of it, and I want to hold it up. Um,
Okay.
okay, yeah. Well, this one is actually not really a dinosaur one so much, but this is incredible, and it's like a kind of a fast read. But it's A Brief History of Earth. That's really about it's a 4 billion years in 8 chapters, and it is by Andrew Knoll, and it's sort of divided up like biological Earth, and the different chapters just tell you how different parts were formed and how they evolve, and animal Earth, and it's great. So I
Oh, that's
recommend that
cool.
book. That's one of the ones I've been reading. It's because geology is a huge part of it. I think
Yeah.
and so that's one of the things I have a lot to learn about.
That's
But I
really,
read them
really
on my
cool. That
Kindle, so
sounds
I'm
great.
really bad at remembering titles.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting,
You
right? The
know?
difference between reading on Kindle and reading on a physical book. Like there's so many advantages to Kindle, and I still, part of me loves to have that book in my hand.
Oh, I know. There's a Kindle thing where that is like that drives me crazy, except that it's like if I travel, I'd like to have choices, and sometimes I
Yeah,
want to read fiction, and
yeah,
sometimes, and I like a few books going at once. But
yeah,
it makes it I'm so bad at remembering titles because of it, and then also authors, which is
yeah,
really important to me. But there's not a way
yeah,
that they're just displayed all the time the way that, you see them on the book. So,
yeah. That's
anyway,
right.
if
That's
you're
interesting.
listening and you make Kindle technology, suggestion.
Yeah, there's an option. Yeah, there's an opportunity there, right? Well,
There
so
is an opportunity.
so I'm going to put you on the spot now. You've
Okay.
you've worked at TED for a long time, and now you're at this museum, and you've been. I mean, I remember coming to your office, and you had a card. I think somebody had sent it to you, but it was posted up on your board, and it said something like, if things were any better, I'd be throwing up rainbows, right? And like
Yep.
you've had a really blessed ride and gotten to meet some of the most amazing people in the whole freaking world. And I know that I didn't give you this ahead of time, so I know I'm putting you on the spot, but out of all
Okay.
the stuff that you've learned and all the people that you've met and all the things that you've done, what would be a candidate, let's say, for your one idea we're spreading? Like, what have you learned specific to your
Oh,
experience that just, if you could share it with humanity, would make a difference for us?
that's a good one. And I mean, it's hard because, I'm not an academic, and I don't do research into anything that, is, I mean, I like, I love, I loved hosting TED and giving the stage to lots of other people, and spreading lots of ideas. I'm definitely myself a generalist, and I'm like
Yeah.
I embrace that fully, fully, fully. But I think would be something around I don't know how I could put it into an idea. I'd have to work on this really hard like a TED
Yeah.
speaker does. But
Yeah.
but it'd be probably something around the importance of human connection and communication through connection. I don't know what that is, but like the thing that probably matters to me more than anything, in the way that I think we're able to move forward in the world in a positive and constructive way, is when we listen to one another, and when we support and help one another when it feels appropriate and right, and when we look after each other. And there are so many people, I feel so lucky, to have so many good people in my life too, that I get to feel that sense of community with. And I just and part of it, though, it sometimes means taking a risk. It sometimes means, sometimes I feel like I might want to stay in my house and not get out and go do something that day. But then I know logically that, like, okay, if I get out and go to this thing this evening, it's going to really fuel me, and it always, always, always does. Sometimes I'm an introvert, believe it or not, and I sometimes have to rest after I, actively go out and do stuff. But it's just always worthwhile. It is always worthwhile. And, to kind of really try to connect with people who are like you, people who are different from you, and just to like listen and learn and exchange stuff.
Yeah. I love that.
Ideas.
I love that. Well, and I think that you have really embodied that throughout the time that I've known you. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I give you kudos for embodying that. And so we're getting close to time. And, is there anything else that you want to say before we go? And before you do that, I will say I'm already making plans to invite you back so that we can maybe deep geek out on, TED Active a little more sometime in the relatively near future. But for this installment, is there anything that you'd like to say to just leave people with or wrap things up?
Well, thank you, John. I would love to come back, and I would love to deeply geek out on TED Active related stuff too, just because that was really, really, really such a special experience to me. And I guess, I don't know, I think I'll go back to a thing we were talking about earlier today that I've been, thinking about a lot recently too, which is I'm just going to kind of re-say a thing we were talking about earlier, but if we do geek out on TED Active again another time, it'll come up again and again and again there. And that is just sort of like this thing of like not getting too hung up or stressed when things don't go as you planned. Because I was thinking back to how we connected. We have been friends for years now, and it's all because of a piece of technology gone wrong. We might not have had the chance to connect if that hadn't happened. And so it's sort of, and then, and then the flood thing and all of that. I just really love the idea too, and maybe that would be my other idea. Maybe I have 2 TED Talks that are hiding inside.
Yeah, I think you have at least 2. Yeah.
But the idea of like, when things don't go as you think they're going to, like, often there's an opportunity inside of that.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a great note to at least pause. We'll end this conversation on. And I just want to thank you so much for coming and for talking with me and for being here and sharing your inside experience at an event that so many of us really like. I know so many people who've been to TED and who haven't been to TED, but who really count TED as like a major influence in their life. So, you were a big, big, big part of that. And so I'll thank you on behalf of everybody that you've made a difference for with the organization of TED and what you did there. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so, so much for having me. And thanks so much to everyone who listened.
All right. And with that, I will say, see you later, and we will see you next time on speaklikealeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.